too. So without further ado, I'm really excited to welcome our host and guest speaker today, Rory Hornstein, who is a registered dietitian with over 15 years of experience specializing in sports nutrition, weight management, eating disorders, digestive health, chronic illness management, and the low FODMAP diet for IBS. And based in Calgary, Rory consults for organizations like the Glencoe Club, Mount Royal University, and the Inflammatory Bowel Disease Clinic at the University of Calgary. Diagnosed with Crohn's disease at the age of 12, Rory's personal journey fuels her passion for helping clients use nutrition to improve their health and well being. She emphasizes a non dieting approach, guiding clients towards intuitive eating and sustainable lifestyle changes. Certified in bariatric nutrition and FODMAP trained through Monash University, Rory also serves on the medical advisory committee for Ostomy Canada Society and is a sought after speaker and consultant in her field. So Rory, maybe what I'll do is just ask you if you don't mind just sharing your screen again for us and we'll get those slides up. And we're going to be really excited to hear today's presentation, which is on living and eating well with an ostomy, practical nutrition strategies, and gut health insights. So without further ado, I'll pass over the mic and the screen to you, Rory. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you. You can hear and see me. See my slides and everything. Everything is good.
It's perfect.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much for the introduction, Troy. It's a pleasure to be here. It's one of my favorite topics, and I've been involved with the medical advisory committee with the Ostomy Association for many, many years. I have provided a lot of information on the slides, but as Troy mentioned, it is being recorded, and there's access to the slides obviously on there as well. So feel free to check back rather than trying to get all the information down. My email and my website is on there as well. So if you need to contact me afterwards or have any other additional questions, just be in touch. The first thing that we're going to talk about is diet and ostomies today. And we're going to talk about how the education involved with ostomy surgery, having that information before can really help with your overall recovery. And so we'll talk about the different symptoms before and after surgery, how the quality of life that can be improved as a result of knowing what to eat with an ostomy. We are going to talk specifically about evidence-based nutrition. There's a lot of information out there in terms of diets for people with new ostomies, but there's a lot of confusion as well in terms of the do's and don'ts. And I think one of the nice things that's happened over time is that we're seeing that there's a lot less restrictions and more inclusions and things that we should add in order to promote a better gut over time. So the first thing we're going to talk about is understanding gut microbiota. And basically, the gut microbiome is all the bacteria within your gut. And when you're born, you have a lot of diversity within the bacteria of the gut. As we get older, we tend to lose the diversity of the gut. And it happens to everybody with age. But when somebody has an inflammatory condition and there's inflammation or there's medications or there's been surgeries or a family history, it's also related to environment, lifestyle. Then basically what happens is your microbiome can change over time. Our goal is to have that microbiome as diverse as possible for as long as you can get it. And the reason is, and we'll talk more about this in a bit, but the gut-brain axis. There's a connection made between the gut and the brain, which is made through what's called the vagus nerve. And the more diverse your bacteria are, the better that connection between the gut and the brain. Because the brain manages things like insulin and weight, hormones, mood, stress, cortisol, inflammation, if your gut microbiome is in what we call dysbiosis and it's not as diverse as what it should be, it's harder for your gut to send a message to the brain. And therefore, all those things become harder to manage as well. So we have seen that in certain conditions, specifically of the gut, that we're looking at Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, irritable bowel syndrome, even mental health like depression, anxiety, stress. All of those things can actually be related to a gut microbiome that is in dysbiosis. So our main goals in terms of understanding, okay, what do we have to do to create more diversity within the gut? So again, there's a number of things that are shaping our gut microbiome, and one of them is diet, which we're going to talk about today. We have stress, infant feeding method, birthing process, lifestyle, life cycle stages, geography, where you're living, and pharmaceuticals. And one of the things that are key is exercise in terms of creating diversity within the gut. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do something intense like CrossFit. It just means that the more active you are, the more walking you do, the more diverse your bacteria will be. The second thing that you can do to create more diversity within the gut is fiber. And I know that this is one of the scary things that are involved with people who do have an ostomy. And we'll talk more about blockages and things like that, but it's the source of fiber that's very important. There's two different kinds of fiber. We have soluble and we have insoluble fiber. And now we actually talk about a third that's called a resistant starch. But if we look at soluble and insoluble fiber, soluble is basically soluble in water, which just means that it's soothing. So it allows for slow movement of food in the intestine and better absorption of nutrients, reduce diarrhea, and inside of food. So if you're looking at an apple, for instance, the inside of the apple will be considered soluble fiber. The peel will be harder for your body to digest and break down. It will draw water into GI tract, and it has a quick movement through the system. So it can lead to irritation of the gut. And those are ones that if you are inflamed, and there is inflammation within the gut, that these ones will cause more inflammation and irritation. But it doesn't mean you do not have insoluble fiber. You look at the load, how much, how often, and being able to accommodate or transition the source of fiber is more important than restricting it. As a result of restricting fiber, what happens is you compromise the gut microbiome. So when we're looking at connecting fiber in the gut microbiota, we know that males need 38 grams of fiber per day. 10 to 15 grams of that should be coming from that soluble-based fiber that we talked about that's soothing, and females 25 grams per day. And again, that'll be closer to about 10 grams per day coming from that soluble source of fiber. So the fiber is key, and this is something that's changed over the last 30, 40 years, is that we're kind of looking at, okay, used to be avoid fiber like the plague, and now we're looking at you need to have fiber. It's about how much, how often, and the quality, because that's what's really important in terms of establishing a better gut microbiome that can send a message to the brain and reduce inflammation or cortisol. So again, that gut-brain connection is basically the fundamental aspect of a healthy gut. This is the most important part. A lot of people who have inflammation, they might have anxiety, they might have stress. I meet a lot of people who have high cholesterol, high blood sugars, and if it's all a result of that gut-brain connection, it's just the foundation is in terms of how diverse those bacteria need to be. And we know that now within our Western diet, it's highly processed, and they've actually done studies in terms of checking the microbiome of people who live in developing countries versus here in North America, and found that the gut microbiome of people in developing countries is way more diverse than what we're finding here as a result of all the processing we have within our food. So things that can, again, be regulated through the gut metabolism axis is weight, hormones, activity, genetics, and medical conditions all will impact our weight. We know that the gut microbes produce chemicals such as short chain fatty acids, which essentially tell our body we've had enough. Hunger, appetite. We know that when people are inflamed, cytokines, which is a kind of protein, is released in the gut and actually suppresses your appetite, so you feel like you're eating less. Ultimately, if you're eating less, your fiber intake goes down, and then you get yourself in this loop of like, okay, now it's harder to get out of this dysbiosis. So some of the foods that we see that are really important in terms of establishing that gut-brain connection, these foods will act like fertilizer for your intestines, and they nourish that gut bacteria. They're a combination of pre and probiotics. So a lot of these foods might be hard for some people to digest or absorb, but we're looking at, again, how much and how often and the load, and a lot of diversity within somebody's diet. So probiotics and prebiotics could be a whole seminar in itself. Basically, we're exploring the mutually beneficial effects of bacteria and their substrates in the human host. And there are a number, obviously, of probiotics and prebiotics on the market that we can use. A lot of this is definitely, it's established with a relationship with gut health, but are they necessary? And so I think it's important for us to know that establishing a foundation through your diet should be the fundamental, and then looking at a probiotic if needed is probably a better approach. A lot of people will change their diet and add a probiotic at the same time, and therefore it becomes really difficult to determine what is working and what's being most effective. Also important to know that every probiotic has a different strain of bacteria. So if you're looking to lower your cholesterol, looking for somebody with irritable bowel syndrome, looking for somebody for weight management, antibiotic, diarrhea, all of those kinds of things will require different strains of probiotic. So it's not enough to just pick a probiotic. It won't target all of those issues. There are specific strains for each probiotic as well. Then there's functional foods. So again, we're just kind of outlining all these things that will be really helpful for a healthy gut. So functional foods include kefir. You'll see certain probiotic juices available on the market. BioK is fermented milk, soy or rice. All of these things establish a better microbiome by including more diversity within the gut. And then we have the dietary supplements. So we talked about the probiotics, and some supplements have been more evidence-based than others and used to promote gut healing and improve autoimmune disease management. Things like turmeric and curcumin can reduce inflammation and help to treat digestive problems. Now we have a known fundamental link between vitamin D and gut health, folic acid, especially with certain medications that some people might be on. Omega-3, important to know that we need a total of 2.7 grams of the two essential fatty acids, EPA and DHA per day. And those things can be found in things like ground flax or flax oil. A lot of the things that you might see marketed that are high in omega-3 might only contain 0.5, 0.7. So is it worth buying your eggs if they're more money if you're getting already 2.7 grams from your diet? So knowing what you're getting is a fundamental from your diet or a foundation first is definitely a better step than just over supplementing for something that it's already going to be hard for your body to absorb. So when we look at all these things in terms of gut health, and the reason I'm focusing on gut health first is because whether or not you do have an ostomy or you know somebody who has an ostomy, it's really important to have a healthy gut. You don't want extra issues on top of having the ostomy, and having an established gut microbiome can really help prevent long-term issues that are complicated as a result of having the ostomy. So we know now that over 70 different chronic diseases have now been linked to our gut microbes, including type 2 diabetes, heart disease, mental health conditions. And so it doesn't have to be restricted. I like the thing about the gut health diet, and that's why I like to start with this, is that the gut health diet is primarily inclusive. It's a thing about adding variety, adding diversity of plants. You want to aim for these 30 plant points a week, getting as much as you possibly can, including fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices, which all have phytoestrogens. So the more colors, the more flavors, the more fiber, the better your gut health is going to be. And obviously, this is one of the challenges we have with an ostomy because many people have restrictions as a result of the foods that they can eat. So our goal today is to be able to outline certain strategies or certain steps you can take in order to become more inclusive with your diet and optimize your gut microbiome. So when we look at dietary restriction, we know that the more you restrict, the more you cause the gut microbiome to go within dysbiosis. So again, it's kind of like that hamster wheel. And again, the more that you kind of restrict, the worse it can actually get because you actually build up sensitivities over time. So when we look at the digestive process as an overview, we know that the digestive system is obviously impacted tremendously when you have an ostomy from the small intestine to the large intestine. And there's different vitamins and minerals that you would need in each section. So whether you've just had an ileostomy, just had a colostomy, just had a urostomy, or you've had, a small bowel resections as a result of Crohn's disease or other surgeries that might have affected the digestive system, like a gallbladder or things like that. Every point of the digestive tract is important in terms of certain specific vitamins and minerals. And it's very important for you to know your disease and know which is impacted within your digestive system, because you might be over supplementing in areas that you don't really need. So this has a lot of information on it. You can refer back to this, but it's just an outline in terms of the differences with urostomies, colostomies, and ileostomies, the region affected and complications, special considerations with each, and then specific nutrition strategies in terms of hydration that would be used, which is obviously a key point in terms of having an ostomy. And the other one is short bowel syndrome as well. So all of these issues, whether it's a urostomy, colostomy, ileostomy, or short bowel syndrome, all affect, as a result of having any of those, will affect your absorption. And chewing is fundamental in terms of being able to digest and absorb foods. It is so, so important. So now we're going to go through eating guidelines specifically with an ostomy and start with once you have recovered from surgery. I'm actually going to add a slide in between here and just say that if this is not an emergency ostomy and you know that you're scheduled to have this, or you know somebody is scheduled to have this, I really feel like it's important that people know this information before they go in for surgery. It's a very overwhelming experience, and I really do feel that if you know this information prior and you're prepared, it can reduce a lot of the anxiety involved in terms of what to expect. If you're somebody who struggled with digestive issues for years and years and years, and then the end result is having an ostomy, then I think it's important to know, how do you kind of fix your gut as best as you can and optimize your gut microbiome prior to that surgery? It is going to make all of these eating guidelines much easier in the long run. So once you have recovered from surgery, there's really no special diet required. You basically want to try to continue eating a variety of foods. You have a new take on a gut. You get adequate fluid intake. It's really important to replace fluids lost in the output. And then post-op, when we look at ostomy surgery, the primary concern is right after the surgery when the bowel is swollen. So the bowel really dislikes the manipulation associated with surgery and swells temporarily. It can take some weeks just to bring that down. And so as a result, it can make potentially certain foods harder to pass through the stoma. So when the stoma is constructed, the bowels pull through the many layers of your abdominal wall before being sutured to your skin. And then basically it expands as food passes through outside into your pouch. So when you have the tension coupled with the initial postoperative swelling and the stoma lumen is also smaller, it can restrict the passage, which is why it can be easy to tweak the form or the texture of the food. So for example, using more smoothies or soups or things like that, cooked vegetables, as opposed to having things that are just harder to digest. It can take about 6 weeks, but again, in any of this process, this is a guideline. Everybody recovers at different stages. And I think, again, it also depends on what kind of condition you're walking into the surgery with to begin with. So there could be short-term food restrictions. And some of those would be more associated with ileostomies than colostomies. However, the foods that cause the most concern because of that swelling, so we're talking about that first 6 weeks, are foods containing cellulose or natural fiber skeleton that holds fruits, vegetables, nuts, and grains together. So humans lack the ability through enzymes or acids to digest these foods in the small intestine, and those fibers can be broken down through other means. So if you chew and you cut them into smaller pieces and cook the food to make the food soft, then that really makes a difference. So I like to call that the 3 C's: it's chewing, cutting, and cooking. And again, this isn't forever. This is these short-term food restrictions right after post-op. So you might notice in the drainage from your ileostomy, the foods like carrots, peas, and peaches look exactly the same. Okay, so it is really important that just because of that swelling initially, that avoiding raw fruits and vegetables, cooking fruits and vegetables until fork tender, looking at the portion that you're actually having, avoiding fruit skins and seeds and dried fruit, avoiding nuts and seeds, anything that's really difficult. So food casings like on sausages, just avoiding them and just knowing how much is too much. Some of this doesn't come down to, oh, the nut triggered a reaction. It's more just how many nuts you actually had or how often you had those nuts. That can make a bigger difference than having a nut. After the 6-week postoperative period, the swelling should be resolved, and then you can start reintroducing the restricted foods in your diet, primarily ones that might be more raw. Again, chewing is fundamental throughout any of these processes, but you might not necessarily need to cook it. So if you try small quantities of one fruit or vegetable at each meal, and I like to call it microdosing, and you chew the food really well, then you have the ability to watch for symptoms. Especially with an ileostomy, it's going through you pretty quick, so you're going to know if it wasn't working. And as foods are tolerated, you can continue to add others, including raw fruits and vegetables. In a colostomy, the dietary modifications are a little bit different. There's a little bit more flexibility. So it's essentially not required at any point, any kind of restrictions in the post-operative period. However, I still think it's important to take your time, especially if there are food sensitivities prior to having the ostomy. Still taking your time to really build up that bacteria, adding a ton of diversity, a ton of variety from a variety of different kinds of foods. The stool from the colon in a colostomy tends to have more bulk, and it's a bit larger in diameter, and so it allows a larger form stool to pass. And so it's more with the colostomy as opposed to blockages and really breaking things down, or an ileostomy. When we're talking about that, the colostomy is more managing gas and odor. So I've worked within this field for, I can't remember how long now, over 20 years, but we'll talk about, I'm happy to share any of my lived experience. I've had inflammatory bowel disease for about 43 years. It gets longer every time I do this presentation. Yeah, like I've had Crohn's colitis. I've had 3 bowel resections as a result of my Crohn's, and I've also had an ileostomy and had it reversed and had a J pouch after 10 months. So I've lived this, I get it. And I think it's important that everybody kind of, that's why I work with this organization. I find it so important is that I see these viewpoints all the time. And after having one, I can definitely relate. So some of the things I hear constantly, and I was thinking myself, will my ileostomy continue to produce output even if I don't eat? Can sugar-free foods containing mannitol, sorbitol, isomaltose, xylitol have a bad effect on my gut? I don't even know what to eat. In the past, certain foods caused me some trouble with digestion. How's that going to affect me since my ostomy surgery? How do you allow your gut to heal? All of these things are really, really important to look at, and I think they're all valid. So no food is all bad or all good. It's really keep focusing on what we talked about at the very beginning with the gut health in terms of maximizing diversity and an inclusive approach to diet and to inclusive approach to food. So the dietary change should be in the context of the whole diet, clinical scenario, and specific issues that need to be addressed, including a dietitian that actually knows something about ostomy nutrition, or any kind of addition, whether it's colorectal cancer, whether it's inflammatory bowel disease. Somebody who's experiencing gut health is primary and really, really important. And so food choice will then hopefully, as these are digestive diseases or digestive disorders, as soon as you have an ostomy, they will actually, it will become practical tool for you to be able to identify which foods will work and won't work for you. And the direction that we're taking right now is more precision and individualized nutrition, not cookie cutter approaches. So I'm going to go through a few of the managing your symptoms and symptoms that we're looking for. Again, you don't have to experience all of these. These are certain things that some people might experience and other people won't. But it's important to know if they come up that they could be normal. So the blockage. So tips to try if you are getting blockages: avoiding large amounts of bran, whole grain, or whole wheat breads, whole wheat pasta, and brown rice. Again, avoiding those dried fruit and rhubarb. A lot of the things that we're going to talk about with blockages, like peeling fruits, chewing foods well, the insoluble source of fiber, those are things that if you do have a blockage or you feel kind of one's coming on, look towards the guidelines we talked about in that post-op before 6 weeks or during the first 6 weeks post-ostomy. A lot of those strategies will work the same way with a blockage. Odor. So if you're looking at cruciferous vegetables like asparagus, broccoli, cabbage, garlic and onions, spices, all those things can actually produce more odor within the ostomy. So, but there are certain foods that you could have that can optimize. So if you are going to be having something like garlic and onion, and you know that produces odor within the ostomy, then what you can do is maybe have a tzatziki with less garlic beside it because it's yogurt based, right? So look at combining certain foods which might eliminate some of the odor that you're having. Gas, very similar to the odor, avoiding legumes or beans, carbonated drinks, which actually produce more gas, beer and alcohol, milk, yogurt, cheese, fermented kinds of foods will produce more gas. And again, those cruciferous ones that we've talked about, avoiding drinking through a straw, which is going to build up more gas, eating regular meals, not skipping meals, portion distribution during the day can be a big, big strategy that you can be used that's helpful with reducing gas. With diarrhea and output, avoiding things like prunes or raisins, avoiding, again, the cruciferous vegetables, avoiding high fiber kind of foods that are coming from bran cereals or whole grains. And then again, not just looking at the avoid, look at the last point there when we look at trying the following foods that can help reduce diarrhea. Okay, so peanut butter is like glue, it slows things down. Okay, pasta, oatmeal, for those of you who need a treat, if you try jelly beans, not jelly beans, but jelly bellies, they have cane sugar in them and they're actually gelatinous, so they help slow down some output as well. So when I see somebody in terms of somebody who's about to get an ostomy or has an ostomy, we look at a nutrition diagnosis first. If there's an unbalanced nutritional intake and deficiencies because somebody walks into the situation already super restrictive, I write down fear of eating. It's very difficult to have a functional gut disorder and not have disordered eating. It's very different than an eating disorder. Disordered eating would be just basically eliminating copious amounts of foods because it's just not worth it, right? Sticking with the same 5 safe foods over and over and over, or obsessive preoccupation with diet. If there's fluid losses and dehydration through diarrhea or through loose output. Fiber. So again, focus on spreading the intake over the day as tolerated. Looking at restriction of foods, which really does need to be individualized. And I talked about that precision nutrition as opposed to a cookie cutter approach. So that leads to food for gut health and some calorie restriction and known reasons as to why we might restrict foods, which comes into food sensitivities. It's pretty hard to have a functional gut disorder without a food sensitivity. And so what we're looking at is the difference between allergies and food sensitivities. The allergy is more of an immune system response. A food sensitivity or food intolerance, that comes more with people who have an absorption issue, a negative response to food. It can lead to like gas and bloating and some of the same symptoms that you might have just seen with the ostomy. So when you look for testing for food sensitivities, most naturopaths do these kinds of testings where they will look at IgG antibodies and they will test lots of foods, like maybe over 100 foods, ranging from dairy to seafood and specific spices. And through these tests, they kind of look at what you're actually more sensitive to. So do they work? Well, ish. So I think that if you're starting from scratch and you just want a foundation, these tests can be super helpful for somebody because it gives them a starting point. That being said, there's very little evidence behind them and they're quite expensive. So IgG may simply indicate that the food is in the diet. So if you're already eating corn, eggs, dairy, things like that within your diet, you walk in to have an IgG test, then the test is going to basically show you that, yeah, those things you're sensitive to. So there's some work to do in regards to these tests. Is there a harm to it? Maybe, because as a result of getting a list of 20 foods that apparently you're sensitive to, you start cutting them out, you start restricting, and as a result of you restricting, you're compromising the gut microbiome and you get more dysbiosis, right? So in result, it can result in a lot of malnutrition. And with somebody with an ostomy, they already are malnourished in terms of the absorption piece. So are there other options? Sure, there's lots of elimination diets out there, right? It is, again, looking at the clinical basis in terms of what bothers you or what allergies do you have. Obviously, an allergy testing gold standard would be an oral food challenge done through an allergist. Okay, not all foods, like not all issues that you're having, they might not all be revolving around food either. So be critical of where you're getting your information from. It can definitely become overwhelming with Dr. Google. And so looking at an option that what is going to allow me to find a strategy to get where I want to and become less restrictive as opposed to more restrictive, knowing what we know now about the gut microbiome. So if you're starting with lactose and gluten, then what's less? Right? And so that leads us to FODMAPs, which is a clinically evidence-based way of figuring out food sensitivities, which enables us to figure out what foods are harder for you to absorb that are higher in what's called fructose. So FODMAPs is an acronym. It stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. And basically what we're looking at is gastroenterologists in Monash University in Australia. They found that people would take out gluten or dairy from their diet and notice that things would get be a little bit easier for them digestive wise, but long term they were still having issues. And it's because certain foods that are high in what's called FODMAPs are harder for you to absorb. So FODMAPs basically will go through the esophagus into the small bowel. The small bowel will have a hard time handling it. It pushes it down to the colon where it's fermented rapidly, and that's what causes either bloating, wind, gas, distension for people, diarrhea, constipation. Sometimes the symptoms in terms of malabsorption don't have anything to do with the gut. It could be energy, brain fog, migraines, back pain. Absorption is systemic. It could be anything. So the idea behind FODMAPs is that you lower your load of fructose for a short period of time, introduce it back in a structured format, and then go back to normal eating, watching the load of those foods. So the two key principles of FODMAPs is restriction of FODMAPs globally. So all fructose may reduce functional gut symptoms, and they don't cause underlying functional gut disorders, but they represent an opportunity for reducing symptoms. And again, because FODMAPs are found in different groups, the fructose, fructans, lactose, galactans, and polyols, the high load of those will produce more osmotic load, water delivery, luminal distension, and a lot of the symptoms we see that are associated with something like an IBS. It's super difficult to have an inflammatory condition or have an ostomy when your digestive system is compromised and not have an absorption issue. You don't hear many people go, I have an ostomy, but I absorb foods great. Don't think so, but there's ways to kind of improve it. So there's certain foods where FODMAPs are found. And again, the easiest way to do this is to look either at a source like Monash University or use a dietitian who's certified in it. And once you reduce the load of FODMAPs from those foods, then you're able to determine which foods are actually hard for you to absorb. So it is a 75 to 80% improvement that we'll see as a result of lowering FODMAPs. It's not only just effective for irritable bowel syndrome, which is an absorption issue, it is now evidence-based in terms of inflammatory bowel disease and linked with basically improving the gut microbiome. Because if you're absorbing things better, then the fiber that you're eating can actually get down to the gut, produce that diversity, and then send a message to the brain, which actually can help you reduce inflammation. So indirectly, FODMAPs are key and can be a game changer for a lot of people, even with an ostomy, because we know the output can be changed as a result of lowering your FODMAP load. So again, all the information in FODMAPs is evidence-based, which is also great, but there's no evidence saying that we should be able to do it long term. You're supposed to do a short-term elimination of high fructose foods, which I do in my practice for about 2 weeks, add the foods back in. It takes about a week and a half, and then you go back to normal eating, watch the load of those foods. When that fermentation process doesn't happen in where the large bowel is or in the colon, and it happens in the small bowel, then what could happen is you could have something called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which is a little bit more complicated and is found more and more commonly with people who do have ostomies. Many of the health regions will not do testing for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or SIBO, so you would have to do that privately, and there's places that you can get that done. But again, it's a little bit more tricky to treat. You could try something like a low FODMAP diet. It might require antibiotics or an elemental diet as well, but I'm mentioning it only because there's a much stronger and direct link with ostomy and SIBO now that we're seeing more often. So again, just really important to go through the patient education on SIBO and ensuring that you understand what it is and the differences between a malabsorption issue and a possible small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So now we're going into, well, how should I eat? Okay, so you have all this information about gut health. You have some tools now that you can use in terms of specific day-to-day symptoms that you might be experiencing, that we can use strategies for blocking or for gas or for odor, for loose output or extreme output or things like that. And now we've talked about sensitivities that you can work around that. And how do I include all this in to actually optimize my gut health? So the most developed way of looking at that right now is Mediterranean diet, is the ultimate diet for gut health. And why I like it is because it looks at things that are more high in fiber, high in omega-3, which can help, again, create that diversity within the gut, optimize inflammation or reduce inflammation, focus on diversity, as well as reducing refined and processed foods. So the Mediterranean diet has been ranked as the best diet for 5 years in a row. I'm kind of anticipating that's going to happen in January again. It's rich in plant-based foods. It's not vegan vegetarian. It has moderate amounts of lean proteins and healthy fats. So it includes chicken, fish, things like that. It does have red meat, but it's just less often, focusing more on legumes and beans and things like that. So knowing that that is a trigger for many people, or they think it is, going back to something like a low FODMAP diet and determining what their capacity is to actually tolerate those foods would be key, because it's very hard to follow a Mediterranean type diet without a bean or a legume or a lentil. So dairy is also allowed on this diet. It's not really a diet, it's more of a lifestyle where it's more inclusive. So again, optimizing that gut health. So there is growing evidence to support a role for gut health in managing and even preventing mental health problems. They have found that there's a much greater improvement in happiness levels compared to placebo in studies when they're following a Mediterranean diet. And it also has a big impact on our gut-brain axis positively. It's all over the news. We know now that if you have an ostomy, you're at higher risk for getting things like with a suppressed immune system. So they're finding that even with CFS or chronic fatigue syndrome, long COVID, fibromyalgia, that focusing on a high intake of fruits, vegetables, nuts, fish, seafood, whole grains, and fiber, and olive oil, and a low intake of red and processed meats as well as sweets can actually help improve the symptoms related to those conditions. And there's a pyramid that's available too, and you'll see that it's very inclusive, and it includes everything. It's really about variety, which is something we tend to lose, especially if you have a diagnosis of a functional gut disorder. This is a really interesting study in terms of a success story that was a SMILES trial that was conducted in 2017. And so what they did is they looked at a Mediterranean diet, which is rich in plant-based foods, to see if it could help depression. And those who followed a diet full of plant-based foods, including all of the super six plant food groups, which are lean meats, fish, eggs, and fermented dairy. So alongside that, provided 3 times more fiber than most of us eat regularly. The average in North America is 10 grams. And if you remember back to that previous slide, women are supposed to be eating 25 grams minimum of fiber and men 38 grams. So a lot more fiber available in terms of Mediterranean. And then, in fact, after 12 weeks in the study, a third of those on the Mediterranean diet were in remission from their depression. So it's pretty fascinating, especially when you're looking at the gut-brain connection. So where do you start with all this information? Start tracking. See where you're at in terms of what you're eating right now, and then get it assessed. There's so many different ways that you can actually track what you're supposed to be eating, whether it's an app, whether it's just retro writing it down. Pictures, there's apps that just take a photo of it, but the more data you have, the better it is. There's specific ones available, like MyABD or for ostomies. I've seen them on Coloplast and websites like that for you to really track and look at your output and see how that relates to what you're eating. This is a book, or these are 3 guides that I helped develop with one of the nurse practitioners at Coloplast. We completed it just over a year ago, and they are online and they are available. They're free. So the reason that they're great, and it's not because I was just involved with writing them, is because they really look at out of the box thinking, incorporating more of this gut health stuff that we've talked about today. There's 3 different books available: the Colostomy Guide, the Urostomy Guide, and the Ileostomy Guide. You don't have to be using Coloplast products to be able to receive the guide. I've put the information down here, or you can email to request them, as well as if you just go to the Coloplast website, and I've put the link down there as well, they're available to download. So we put a lot of time into these, and I think they're great, and they're super, super effective, and they're more modern than some of the ones that you might be seeing, whether it's in a hospital. So key takeaways, and then we have some time for some questions. So unlike your genetic makeup, those are the cards you were dealt. You have the ability to shape your gut microbiota simply by how you treat it, which means that a big part of your personal health is in your hands. So we need to change these nutritional recommendations on fiber. There's still way too much information out there indicating that if you have an ostomy, you should be running away from fiber, and that's not the case. It's the primary substrate for nourishing gut microbial communities. It's the type of fiber that you use that's very important. Become aware of your own symptoms. What aids your recovery process? Look at a precision nutrition. Most people with ostomies have no idea what portions of their bowel are removed and what remains. So get an operative report, figure it out. You have the information now in this slideshow that tells you exactly which nutrients you might be deficient in based on where your surgery was. After healing is complete and the ostomy is functioning normally, most people with an ostomy will return to a normal diet. Many people do not have an ostomy and are still following a Mediterranean type diet. You should be able to eat everything. It's about how much and how often. Finding variety and diversity is key. There's no research supporting using those sensitivities or IgG tests to diagnose or predict adverse reactions to foods. There's better ways to figure out which foods you're sensitive to, specifically using things like FODMAPs if there is an absorption issue. So if there's no inflammation, there's no issue with swelling around your stoma, there's no blockages, there's nothing like that, but you're still finding that your output is way more frequent than it should be. You're up through the night, emptying your bag 3-4 times, then there's an absorption issue. And looking at FODMAPs can be a game changer in terms of reducing the number of times you're emptying that bag. The more you empty the bag, the more your skin is going to bother you as well, the more leakages you're going to have. So looking at that motility in terms of the ostomy is key. Smallest amount you need to be satisfied. While the Mediterranean diet is not a cure, we definitely know it can help manage symptoms and improve quality of life by reducing inflammation, helping with energy, and overall physical and mental health. Looking at anti-inflammatory nutrition, optimizing inclusive versus restrictive, using food as medicine. It's a digestive disorder, so obviously what you're eating is going to impact how the ostomy works. And there's many things that might have brought you up to the point that you have an ostomy, and a lot of them might not have been in your control, but this 100% is. So look at managing this the best way you can and use a lot of the tools that they didn't even have 10 years ago, because if you're going to have an ostomy and you're going to have to deal with learning and adjusting and coping and managing and adapting your life for the ostomy, this is the time to do it, because we have a lot more strategies and treatments now in terms of diet therapy than we did years before.
Thank you so much, Rory. That was absolutely fantastic. And I'll just reiterate to those in the audience as well, is that you will be able to take a look at these fantastic slides later as recording. I know we had some great stuff, including the tables, the pyramids that you were showing for the Mediterranean diet, and quite a few number of really interesting stuff there, and going back to the Coloplast resources and stuff as well. We do have quite a number of great questions. I know a lot of them you've touched on in this presentation, but maybe we'll start on a conversation about weight gain, weight loss here, specifically as it relates to nutrition. So some people are asking why they might see a more sudden weight loss. They've had an ostomy for over 13 years. Why might someone start seeing some initial weight loss from a nutrition standpoint?
Okay, great question. So in terms of weight, we know that metabolism, which is how your body burns off calories, is linked with your digestive system. If you're having issues absorbing foods, then it's definitely going to impact how your weight is going. Is it going up or down, right? So if there's weight loss, it could be an issue of just not eating enough of the right kinds of foods, right? And optimizing how many calories, how many carbs, fats, and proteins you're actually eating. But it also could be a matter of absorption. And I find it very effective to look at that FODMAP piece when you're looking at weight as well, because if the output is consistent, like you're emptying that bag like much more frequently than what you think you should. Okay. So, and if you're running back and it's a constant during the day or the night, then that literally, I mean, we could add more calories to that, but for what purpose? It's going to be going right through you. And that's why I feel like if we can slow down things and kind of look at the motility aspect of it, adding more fiber, it's easier than to add more calories, more protein that will actually enhance weight gain. Right? If you're looking that you've lost weight, you want to kind of gain that. So it feels kind of counterintuitive to be looking at an elimination diet in order to gain weight, but it works so well. And I've had so many patients, whether it's, with an ostomy or celiac disease, who have been struggling to gain weight for years and years and years. And then they reduce the FODMAP load and we can add more calories in because they're actually absorbing those calories and the weight naturally goes up to their set point. Same thing with weight loss. If you're not absorbing things, it's very difficult to cue into whether you're hungry or full. And that's satiety cue. So people they just feel like it's just empty. Like it's just like, right?
Mm.
Just keep eating and eating and eating, and you're not filling anything up. And so as a result of doing that, your calorie intake is going up, your weight gain is going up. So there is a better way, and I know that there's only a few places literally across the country that will do the perfect kind of test, but you can get your resting metabolic rate tested, and that will tell you exactly how many calories your body is burning at rest and how efficiently your body is burning fats versus carbs. So if you're looking at resting metabolic rate testing, again, it feeds into the whole precision individualized nutrition, because once you know how much you're supposed to be eating and exactly what you should be eating in terms of the quality, it's easier for us to figure out this is what's going to optimize weight. It's going to optimize weight gain or weight loss. So that's my favorite approach that I use within my practice, but it's not available to everybody.
No, I think that's fair enough. And I know we had some other questions for some people who were mentioning kind of what you're talking about. I'm feeling hungry, but I'm gaining weight despite eating the protein. Should I cut out the carbs? But it sounds like what you're saying too here. Better to understand at what rate you're metabolizing either your fats
Exactly.
or your carbs. Okay, well that's a good thing to consider there too.
Mm.
On a similar topic here, um, you're mentioning earlier on too about the use of things like peanut butter, for example, to slow down some of this here. Someone was asking if they're a diabetic, how can fluid and high output issues be managed when most thickening foods might be high carb? Have you run into an issue like this too in the past? Any initial suggestions perhaps for someone who's diabetic?
Yeah, not all of them are high carb. Like if you look at peanut butter, there's lots of natural peanut butters that aren't high carb, it's high fat.
Hmm.
Right? So you don't have to be using those typical thickening things that are in terms of carbs. But the other part is it's not just the food. Like the peanut butter is fantastic. Like it's a game. It's awesome. It's a miracle worker when it comes to that. However, we have options. You have to look at the peanut butters and ensure you're getting less sugar, less processing. Because what's the point of adding a processed peanut butter and then it's going right through you? You're not digesting or absorbing that anyway. The other thing you can do is look at optimizing fiber, because for some people who are diabetic, it's not about reducing all the sugars. It's actually adding fiber to a bulk up the stool, but also reduce your blood sugars and be able to control insulin more,
Hmm.
right? And a lot of people who have elevated blood sugars, they're not actually absorbing the fiber, and that's why their blood sugars are elevated. It's all together. It's the same issue. The other thing in terms of diabetics that people need to watch is that with the artificial sweeteners, that many of the sugar-free products and things like that, that is literally picking up your motility tenfold. Like things are now running through you. They are super
Hmm.
high in polyols, which is a kind of FODMAPs. So the only safe artificial sweetener that is considered safe in terms of the load that won't cause this malabsorption issue is stevia. So if you're using something like erythritol or Splenda or xylitol and you have a functional gut disorders or an ostomy, I'd highly recommend considering changing or at least increase the amount of fiber you're doing to help regulate the gut.
Thank you for touching on that. I think that's really helpful. And just out of curiosity as well. So, for example, I'm allergic to peanuts. Would almond things like almond butter or
Yeah,
other
same.
very similar process,
Yeah,
right? So,
any
if you
kind
are
of nut
having
butter is
different,
fine. Yeah,
fantastic. Yeah.
and they
Okay.
have some great ones out there now that are made with almond butter and they have chia seeds in them and things like that are also
Hmm.
anti-inflammatory. You can also add your own chia seeds in them. So there's lots of different options that you could use with peanut butter. You don't have to do the peanuts.
Fantastic. Okay, well, that's good to know here. And we had a question from our chat here, and it might be an interesting case you might have run into in the past, perhaps. For those who might be doing fasting, whether it be for Ramadan or something else, have you ever worked with someone before who would be fasting with an ileostomy? And would you have any initial sort of suggestions for how you could potentially fast in a way that will still regulate yourself well enough to be okay with an ileostomy? So again,
Um,
Ramadan, we're talking no food, no water for certain hours during the middle of the day.
Yep, yep. No, it can work. I have had clients who've had a colostomy and ileostomy who had to fast all day. I think the key is the quality of what you're eating after that. right, for that meal in the evening, that's what's key. It's manageable 100%. We see people for years with functional gut disorder finding that something like intermittent fasting, for instance, is very effective, right? And usually it's a result of looking at the intake the night before. So if the intake the night before is high in those FODMAPs or high in that fructose, then nobody feels like getting up and eating if they've been up all night to the bathroom, right? And they're feeling horrible and bloated and running to the bathroom. You're not going to have breakfast. So naturally, those people with functional gut disorders will naturally just eat later in the day, right? Or that window that's at noon or 11 a.m. or whatever. So that works, right? However, when you're looking at something like Ramadan, what I found really effective is using some of the principles, not doing a strict low FODMAP diet, but looking at a modified FODMAP approach. Because a lot of the foods that you might have in return to that, in regards to that meal, are high in garlic and high in onion, which are two very high FODMAPs. Okay, so if a lot of the garlic and onion is found in that one meal, it's going to be harder for you to manage your symptoms if you're fasting the whole day and you keep loading up for the month, right? But if you modify how many FODMAPs you're doing at that dinner meal, it's going to make that fasting period that much easier to tolerate and totally manageable.
Yeah, well, thank you for touching on that. I think that comes up quite often too, that we see in some of our questions here. Pivoting just a little bit here, we again, a lot of the questions we're talking about is how I can cut out my carbs, and look more on the protein side. Someone's also asking about the use of either a keto or a carnivore diet. This person specifically is with a J pouch, but in general, do you typically have clients who are coming in saying, I'm working on the keto diet or I'm working on a carnivore diet? Are you things that you initially provide as suggestions to look out for if you are going to be on these diets?
Yeah, 100%. It's definitely every 2 days I get asked about the keto. Yeah, you can. So here's the thing, keto, yeah, I find short term, it works great for people with digestive issues, whether it's an ostomy or not. The keto and the carnivore, well, protein, you could eat a cow and it's not going to affect you. It's going to probably cause you other issues with your heart, but it's not going to affect anything with your digestive issue unless you have, fat malabsorption issue, right? They're not lean cuts of meat, but you can do a clean version of those things as well. I think the biggest long-term effect of following something like keto when you're compromised in terms of that gut microbiome is lack of fiber. So if you can find a way to find a keto gentle or carnivore gentle approach, whereby at least you're hitting the minimum guidelines of fiber using low carb, then that's the best way to do it. So for example, if we want to optimize fiber that's soluble based, that's easier for your body to absorb, use protein and fat and reduce carbs, hemp hearts, chia seeds, ground flax, avocado, olives, olive oil, bring it on. Okay, like all of those things, like especially olives, avocado, nuts and seeds, nut and seed butter, the hemp hearts, chia seeds, ground flax, none of them have carbs. They're all fats. They're all part of keto and carnivore, but they're all anti-inflammatory. So if you're going to do it that way, do it properly and just don't compensate the fiber. Because with the amount of people that I have per week coming and say, hey, I'm already doing keto and carnivore, can we switch it? I have the same amount of people saying, I tried that. It made me feel like a disaster in 3 weeks. Okay, so it's all great if you find a gentle approach. I think it has a place.
Yeah, well, thank you for touching on that. I think that kind of goes over with your overall theme too, is about not just completely eliminating anything, or it's about your moderation, how you're actually going to be eating things over time here too. So thank you
Right.
for touching on that. I just want to, I know we've got tons of kind of questions that were still all about our probiotics side of things, our supplements and vitamins, whether you have a colostomy, ileostomy, etc. I know we touched on that a lot. There's a lot of information at the beginning. Is there any major key takeaways that you wanted to reiterate when it comes to taking probiotics or supplements for
Yeah.
each of the types, just as a quick little reminder?
Yeah, so just as a reminder, I would look at your diet as a whole first. Many health regions aren't doing nutrient analysis anymore. They'll check your vitamin D, and zinc and things like that if you have absorption issues. So before you supplement, see where you're at because you might not be deficient, right? Like you don't know until you check that out. So that's the first thing. In terms of probiotics, if you're looking at gut health, try a lot of the things that we kind of discussed through the presentation first in terms of optimizing the gut microbiome. And then if you still warrant a probiotic, then ensure you're getting one with the strain of bacteria that's specific to what you're looking for. So if it's an absorption issue, look for this right probiotic or right for the strain bacteria. As I mentioned, I use an app that's updated all the time, I'm just going to look at the name of it because I can never remember the exact name of it. Again, it's not cheap, but you don't necessarily have to buy it. I would just kind of do your search and find out. But it's called the Clinical Guide to Probiotic Products. They have their 2024 edition out right now. So how the app breaks it down is to brand name, application, age, gender, all probiotics, functional foods. So at least that you know if you're going to get a probiotic, it's the right strain, as opposed to walking into like Safeway and saying, "Hey, I need a probiotic," and they give everybody a line.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's not going to work. This is a specific condition. So it can be effective, but just know that I've gone to lots of Canadian Digestive Week conferences, and conference after conference, there's still not enough evidence saying that everybody with, digestive disorder and has had this kind of surgery like an ostomy should be on a probiotic.
I think that's a good point to make too, and maybe just to expand that out a little bit. So if someone is interested in this topic, again, would you recommend first do as much as you can on your own, do your diary entries, etc., before maybe going directly to a pharmacist at your Walmart or wherever, and then just assuming it's going to be the right thing for you?
Yeah. I know from like my older son has Crohn's disease, and he was on two courses of antibiotics last year, which gave me more anxiety than anything else. And I was like, well, we're just gonna, just in case, we got a probiotic in the fridge. So I sent my husband to Co-op and I said, this is the brand name I want. They didn't have it. They gave him another one. It came home. The first ingredient was fructose. Drives me
Mm.
crazy. Like, why would I take a probiotic or give a probiotic to somebody with a functional gut disorder who has a hard time absorbing fructose every single day as
Mm.
part of their probiotic? So Jameson at Costco, fructose, right? Like a
Right.
lot of them are overly processed. So really look at to what you're buying.
Okay, I think that's important point to make there. I'm just going to quickly check on the chat to see what other questions we might have had here. I know we've got just a couple more minutes here. One question we have is about how we can potentially increase fiber if you're at risk for obstruction. Is there a certain category of foods we look at to help increase the fiber while being at that risk?
Yep. So those ones would be either higher in resistant starch, which are easier for your body to absorb and less susceptible to have any kind of irritation. So like insoluble fibers, like we talked about the apple peel. Basically, the way I like to look at it is if you can put anything in your blender and it blends up without water, and it's not really chunky and there's not like pieces everywhere, it's going to go the same way through your gut. So if you look at a blueberry, for instance, it has a skin, it has tiny seeds. If you're super inflamed and you know that, okay, there's susceptibility to have a blockage there, do not have a half a cup of blueberries. Like you're adding kindling to the fire, right? But if you're blending them up in a smoothie, even if you blend them up, you always see those little pieces of blueberry. Same thing, but it's easier for your gut to break down. So you're smarter to do it. The more you can blend it or puree it, the better if you're more susceptible, but you're still going to get fiber. Just the source of fiber is easier to digest and break down.
Okay, and that's really helpful to mention here too. And someone was mentioning too that they experience pressure above the stoma after about 20 minutes after eating their third cup of puree food. Have you heard of this before, where someone might still be feeling some of this pressure even after they've gone through the pureed food process? Is this something that you've been familiar with in
Well,
the past?
pureed and liquid food is easier for your body to absorb. So if you're having more than what your gut can handle, you're going to get that pressure.
I
So it
see.
might not be the form of the food, it might be how much of the food you're actually having. So you might be better off doing a little bit, waiting a couple hours, doing a little bit, waiting a couple hours, and see if that pressure resolves.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to make, and I did like that you're mentioning too, is sometimes like that more constant, or not constant, but the snacking throughout the day type kind of method too,
Yeah.
which is helpful as well. Okay, that was fantastic. I'm just gonna take a look at our time here. We're right at the hour, so what I'll mention here is if you haven't already had a chance, if those in the in our registration or in our attendance here haven't already seen our past webinars, we have done a diet related webinar that Rory actually helped pre-record. This was last year. We still have it up available on our ostomycanada.ca website. So the same place you went to go register for this webinar, we do have a library of past webinars too. Some on nutrition, some on gas and bloating, peristomal hernia, skin conditions, quite a lot of different stuff. So we do encourage you to go check those out as well. But what I'll say now is a super huge thanks to you, Rory. It's really appreciated that you were able to take the time today to talk about this. It's such an important topic, and it's something that we're doing every single day here. So very, very helpful to be able to share this. If you haven't, if you feel like you haven't got your question answered here, we can also suggest that you take a look at some of our news posts or blog posts from our Medical Lifestyle Advisory Committee. People like Rory have been able to contribute to that in the past too. So you're getting some great information in text form there as well. So for all other information, do send us an email or try to get in contact us through our website and check out what we have available for you. But other than that, I'll just say thanks again, Rory. We really appreciate you having you on
Thanks so
today.
much for having me.
Amazing. Okay, I'll pass it back over to Yasser behind the scenes to help play us out with our video. And thanks again to everyone for coming on today. We really appreciate having you on. Oh, one more thing. Our next webinar will be coming up in January. Stay tuned for an announcement on that. But your email inbox will have another update with another webinar coming up right after the new year. Thanks, everyone.